super excited. It's really awesome to see so many of you out here at our monthly BPEG meeting. So before we get started, save the date. Earth Day is coming up. Saturday, April 20th from 9:30 to 3 p.m. It's going to be at the Lindsay Track Trail. We're looking for volunteers. So if you have some time to spare leading up to it, the day of, the night before, you can get a hold of us at info@bpeg.ca, and we have all our information on these BPEG cards if you want to get a hold of us there. So that's coming up. Save the date on that one. Next month we have Julie Stankovichus visiting from the Parks Canada as well, and she is the Visitor Safety and Fire Operations Coordinator. So it is about fire safety in the Bruce. So really timely one for that one. That is the first Wednesday in April, so I believe that's April 3rd at 7 p.m. right here. If you're not a member, why not?
Why not?
Okay. So there are some membership forms at the front of the room that you can fill out to become a member. You can also do that online at www.bpeg.ca. And if you like, there's also a little small donation box if you have a couple dollars in your pocket. I'm always begging for your money. So that's at the front door as well. And yes, that should be about it. So with all due, this is Maddie Sanagan from the Parks Canada, and she is speaking tonight on their live. So really enjoy this, and we will welcome it.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, that's great. Can everyone hear okay? Yeah. Projecting enough? Okay, if I get too quiet, just let me know. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Bears are very important and close to my heart, so I'm very excited to be able to talk about them today. And before we kind of dive in, I'll just let everybody know sort of the game plan, just so you all know what's going on. So overall, I'll probably only be yapping for about 30 minutes, 30, 45 minutes, depending on how detailed I get. And then feel free if you need to get up, go to the bathroom, get water, cookies, whatever. I don't mind at all. Feel free. So we'll start with a little introduction and ease us in. Then I have some sort of fun stuff about bears themselves, and then we'll move into sort of the actionable stuff at the end there, and what the park is doing and what you can do to help. So that's sort of the plan for tonight. And we'll have time at the end for questions, but if you have like a burning question during the presentation, obviously feel free to ask. I don't want you to lose it or forget about it at the end. So yeah, so once again, my name is Madeline, or Maddie is good too. I'm the acting interpretation coordinator at Bruce Peninsula National Park and 5&5 National Marine Park. Yeah, I've been there for, I think this is going to be my 5th year, which that flew by. I started in 2020, so it's all kind of a blur. But I've actually been an interpreter, just to give you a little background about myself, so I'm not a stranger to you. Been an interpreter for over 10, 11 years now. Always been outside, always loved animals and being outside. And eventually that led to me landing a job with Ontario Parks, which I was with for many years. And then between Ontario Parks and Parks Canada, I also had a gig at a wildlife sanctuary where we did some of the animals who were not releasable, we would do programs with for the public. So animals are a dear part of my heart, and again, I really jump at any chance to talk about them and learn about them. So yeah, so that's a little bit about myself. Of course, I work for the park, so we're a part of kind of a greater area in the northern Bruce that's protected or where there's conservation efforts by various organizations, including us, to help preserve the really unique habitat that we have here. We're so lucky to live on the peninsula. It's a beautiful place, and there's some globally rare habitats and species that live here. So, and then also too, the national parks are part of obviously the bigger network of national parks. historic sites and marine conservation areas all across the country. So that's a little background on myself and who I work for. So yeah, so we're on the traditional territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. So that's represented by the two communities, Saugeen First Nation, which I grew up right next door to in Southampton, and then the Chippewas and Nawash in Neshinimini, which is not too far from here. And I was happy to see actually recently that the Environment Office from San posted about bears. So I just decided to throw that in for you to see. Bears are the bear kind of in the Anishinaabe culture, from my understanding. Of course, I am not Indigenous myself, but the bear sort of represents the courage or bravery in the seven teachings. So seven grandfather teachings, which you may have heard of before. And there's some obvious connections there, I think, for, you know, mother bears protecting their young. That's a pretty courageous and brave thing to have to do. But also some other, like, more nuanced things that you can read into in terms of having the strength to face your fears and carry that with you, that kind of thing. So there are definitely lots of cultural connections that I've been taught. And actually, I was lucky to work with Jana Shigano. She actually no longer works for Park. She moved on over to Department of Fisheries and Oceans, so wishing her all the best over there. But when we did work together, she gave me a little quote to use in my programs about bears, and I'll let you read that in your own words. But essentially, to paraphrase, she's talking about bears being healers and protectors. So in this case, it can be interpreted in a lot of ways, but in this case, she was talking about sort of healing past grievances or relationships, and protecting First Nation histories and culture and the land. And I thought that was really beautiful because it also sort of connects to how I sort of see black bears as protectors of the forest as well, of their own home. So not just of the people, but also where they live. And that's where we get into what I mentioned before. So we'll start with the healing part. If you look at the skull here, so this is a black bear skull. Does anyone notice anything about the teeth? I mean, there's the obvious part. Anything look familiar though? Omnivore. Yeah, what makes you think omnivore? Omnivore, I'm not sure where that came from.
Sharp teeth and then molars like that.
Exactly. So those back molars back there look a lot like our teeth. And you're exactly right. Bears are often really misunderstood and thought of as hunters or predators, and they certainly can hunt if they feel like it, or if there's an opportunity to that doesn't take too much of their energy. But they're mostly eating vegetation. So about 85 to 90% of their natural diet is plants. So they don't eat a whole lot of meat at all, and the meat that they do eat is generally already dead. They don't like to spend a lot of energy. They don't like to move around super fast. They don't have to. So they'll eat carrion, which is another word for like carcasses that they come across, like dead fish or something that's been struck on the road, say, or killed by another animal in the forest. They'll happily eat that. But again, they're opportunistic. So if they do come across, say, a baby fawn by itself, that's an easy meal. It's not gonna run away likely. They'll also take vulnerable animals like weak, sick, or old deer or things like that, smaller animals like rabbits. So they definitely do eat meat, but mostly they're looking for plants. And you can, I mean, I'm sure you've all noticed if you've seen bear poop around, it is full of pretty obvious, I mean, you can see what their last meal was. It's all still there. So they're eating a lot of different things. They have a pretty varied diet. I almost was thinking, looking at this as I was putting it together, like this would be a good charcuterie board if I ate all these things. Sort of a little bit of everything. Yeah, you can see that like catkins, so like new early growth or flowers. Lots of different berries, lots of blackberries up here. Blueberries, not so much on the peninsula. We don't have a lot of blueberries on the peninsula. So it's not as much of a staple as it would be like, say, Northern Ontario. Lots of beech nuts. Beech nuts are probably their favorite food. If I was to wager a guess, they're really high in fat and protein, and so yeah, they're gonna go for those beech nuts. And it's kind of funny because you can see when a bear has visited a beech tree usually, because they leave their claw marks on it, and just the way that the beech tree grows its bark, it generally holds those scars, which you'll see a few slides from now. I think I have a picture in there. Strawberry, like wild strawberries, of course. Mountain ash berries are a big one too. Again, we don't have too many of those up on the peninsula, but they're around. And then they'll also be looking for lots of bugs. So early spring, they'll be eating ants mostly. They'll go for caterpillars or grubs in the ground. So yeah, a little bit of everything. They'll, as long as it's edible to them, they'll give it a go. They are eating lots and lots and lots only for half the year. So they do hibernate, right? So their whole summer season, or spring, summer, fall season, revolves around packing on that weight so they can make it through the next hibernation winter. And so they're always roaming around the forest. They're always looking for their next meal to get more calories. And so when they're doing that, they're eating, of course, coming out the other end. They are spreading their poop everywhere. And in that poop is all those seeds and nuts and things. And a lot of them survive enough that they can germinate. And they have built-in fertilizer right there. So the bears are really planting the forest as they go. Even though they don't likely know that about themselves, but the things that they're eating, they're then spreading around and helping the forest to regenerate and to continue to grow. So we're really, really grateful for bears for that reason. So onto the regenerate portion here. So I was saying they're moving around lots. They are looking for bugs and insects in the soil or in rotting trees. And you'll see there's those claw marks I was talking about on the beech tree there. The claws in the other photo here. The larger one is a grizzly bear, don't panic. Just want to show the size difference there for you. And then the smaller one is the black bear. So still pretty sizable claws. But for the most part, they're using those claws to climb, definitely, but also to dig and tear things up. And when they do that, they're opening up a log to look for bugs in there to eat. When they're doing that, they're actually helping to accelerate the decomposition of that log, which then in turn will help it become soil sooner. So they're almost becoming gardeners that way. And then similarly, they'll also be digging through the soil lots to look for those bugs, and they're turning it over by doing that, kind of like you would in your garden. So it's aerating the soil, it's loosening things up so other plants can get in there and get a foothold and grow. So yeah, they're walking around, they're planting stuff, and then they're tending to that garden, if you want to say it that way. So yeah, so another reason to be grateful for sure. So after all of that work to put on weight in spring, summer, and fall, of course they're looking to enter into hibernation. So the regeneration for them is the rest that they get, that torpor, the deep sleep that they go into. And this is the time for females to have their babies. But interestingly, for female black bears, if they've mated that season, they don't necessarily get pregnant. So what happens is they'll mate in the spring or in the summer, and then the embryos essentially stay in sort of like a suspended state. So they don't implant into the uterus at all, and it waits until it's time to enter into hibernation. And at that point, the body decides, I'm not sure how really yet, but the body decides whether or not she'll be able to have those babies. And so if she's underweight, she hasn't eaten enough that year, say there was a drought, there wasn't very many berries, or there was some kind of a tree nut collapse or something like that, then she would just absorb those embryos and try again the next year. Because ultimately her body is trying to protect her first and make sure that if she is going to have babies in hibernation, that she'll have enough fat on her to feed them and for her to survive as well. So that's pretty cool. And also very neat about their hibernation is when they go in there, they're not going to the bathroom, they're not eating, they're not drinking. The babies are born and they're awake and drinking milk from mom, but she'll wake up every now and then, just kind of just sniff around and check on her babies. But for the most part, she's sleeping. So she's not going to the bathroom, she's not ingesting anything. You can see that that's kind of a problem if it's like 6 months of the year. Nothing in, nothing out. So what has been discovered actually is the urea in their body, so what would normally produce your urine, gets recycled. So they're essentially able to take the protein in their urea to prevent muscle atrophy. Because otherwise, if you think about it, if you're laying there for 6 months, you're not going to be able to get up by the end, usually is how it would work. But through some process, they're able to recycle their urea and to keep that muscle tone. They definitely burn through their fat, so they're quite skinny when they get out, but at least they can still get up and get moving, and they still have their strength. So this is somewhat of a recent discovery from my understanding, but definitely within the last 10 years. And it's been exciting enough that some space agencies have been looking into black bears and how this happens to be able to figure out if there's some way that we could replicate it for astronauts so that they don't get their muscles atrophying in space. So it's pretty cool. So the cubs are growing in the safety of the den. Again, there's another different kind of regeneration that's happening. So mom's getting rest and the babies are growing. And you can see actually, so these are all pictures from Peninsula bear dens. So these were taken quite some time ago, I think early 2000s, when the park was doing bear surveys. So they were actually looking for bear dens and going in and tagging the bears and taking some measurements. If any of you used to watch the Rick Mercer report, there was an episode on that. I don't have it, unfortunately, but it's pretty cool. You can see the den, and they take the cubs out, and it was some people's lucky job to keep the cubs warm while they took some data from mom. So yeah, so these are real hibernation dens. They don't typically use the same den every year. I'm not 100% sure why. I would guess that it gets a little stinky in there, a little dirty, and they just decide to start over fresh the next year. That would be my best guess. But you can imagine on the peninsula, hibernation dens are often going to be like pretty like rocky, damp. Like if you think of potholes, glacial potholes, they'll sometimes use those, or small caves. So it's often not the most comfortable. This one doesn't look too bad, but sometimes those hibernation dens are not the best. So they don't have it super easy in the winter, but they definitely make it through. And finally, we have bears as protectors here. So like I mentioned before, mother bears are pretty widely known to be fiercely protective of their cubs. It's sort of rule number one is if you see a bear with cubs, get out of the way, or at least don't corner them or get in between them, because she's very protective. She'll do everything she can to make sure those cubs are safe. It's her number one priority. So they are protective, but they also are protecting the forest, I think. So if you think about it, they're roaming around. Bears are pretty stinky. I have been able to smell them while walking around in the woods. Once you know what it smells like, you can recognize it. So they like to leave their scent from time to time on trees and things. And part of that is because they have territories. They have sort of areas that they consider sort of theirs. For females, it's smaller. It's only about 20 to 50 square kilometers. But for the males, you're looking especially in Northern Ontario, more like 150 square kilometers. Obviously on the peninsula that would be pretty overlapping because we don't have that much space. But they have territories, so they're going to be marking those territories just like any other animal. Which if you're a prey animal, like a deer or a rabbit of some kind, you're going to be picking up on those scents pretty frequently. You're going to be listening for big animals. If you see a big animal, you're probably not even going to double check. You're just going to get out of there. So in effect, what happens by the bear roaming around so much to get food, they're essentially making sure that those prey animals, which are usually browsing like herbivores, are just being kept on their toes. So they're just sort of, they're not going to settle down anywhere for any large amount of time. They're probably going to want to keep moving because they don't want to get eaten, even though the bears are very unlikely to try to eat them. The prey animals don't know that. So what that means is that things like deer aren't going to be over browsing. They're not going to be overeating, basically, the vegetation in the forest. Because what can happen, and you can see this in cattle fields where there is a forest, there's like a line. You can see where they've eaten everything off the trees. That's essentially what deer would do if they were given the chance and if they felt comfortable and safe enough to just sort of stay put for a long time. So bears are essentially protecting the forest from being overeaten in certain concentrated areas. So we have them to thank for that. Which is really important up here because the park and the surrounding area of Northern Bruce Peninsula, we are known to be the largest contiguous forest in Southern Ontario. And what that means is sort of uninterrupted woods, essentially is what that means. And you can see it pretty clearly on these maps, especially on the white and green one. You can sort of see the line sort of above Lake Simcoe and over to Kingston. That's sort of the cutoff of Southern Ontario, and then we've got that nice dark green on the peninsula. And you can even actually see sort of the line of the Niagara Escarpment as well, which is lots of protected areas there too. So it is really important that our forests remain protected because there is so little in Southern Ontario anymore. And so having bears be sort of the protectors and the stewards of those forests is really important because we don't have a lot of it left. So and these corridors and these connected habitats are not just important for bears. They're also, if you think about migration corridors for birds, they're relying on the varied habitat sort of along the shorelines there. Or anything that sort of needs the forest, the biodiversity that comes with that. It's important that we have those big spaces that are sort of not interrupted or fragmented too much. So, yeah. So while the bears are protecting the forest for themselves and for other animals and also for us, it's also our responsibility, I think, to be protecting bears. They can only protect themselves so much. We are, of course, the biggest threat to bears with things that we do. So some of those threats are more obvious and familiar. I'm sure a lot of, like I was saying earlier, I'm sure everybody has a bear story here, or has encountered one, or heard someone who's encountered one, or lost a bird feeder to one, or whatever. But the bears' gifts that they have can often work against them when they're neighbors with humans. So what I mean by that is their sense of smell is incredible. They can smell 2 kilometers away. They can smell 30 centimeters deep into the ground. Their nose is built for finding food. Their eyesight is incredible. They can see in pretty good color, we think, to be able to find berries and stuff. So they can tell by looking at something pretty easily if it's edible or if they're going to try to see if it's edible. They have incredible memory. Their brain is pretty big, actually. And though the size of the brain doesn't necessarily equate to intellect or smarts, it does say something about their ability with their memory to remember where the best berry patches are, or sometimes where you tend to leave your garbage on the side of the road or things like that. And we've actually seen or heard of bears that will return once they're rewarded with something like garbage or you leave something out or a bird feeder, they will come back 3 to 4 times after that reward that they got, almost like a dog, to check and see if it's there again. So they're remembering the specific spots, they remember what they got and that it was tasty, and they'll keep coming back until they decide, okay, this is not going to happen again. So all those things can get them into trouble because they find stuff that we leave out. It also means that they're likely coming across roads, potentially getting hit by cars. Getting strikes is definitely a concern, especially the more roads that we have and the more that they have to cross just to get around their territory. Of course, like I mentioned, the habituated bears, we use the word habituated to describe a bear that has gotten used to being fed, whether intentionally or not. So that's a bear that's basically now relying on human food or waste to get their food. We also don't really know for sure how the food that they're eating, that's our garbage, is impacting their bodies. There was a small study done in the States. I can't remember which state at the moment. It was pretty small, and so take it with a grain of salt because it's hard to determine if it's just in that location or if it's a bigger trend. But I believe they looked at 30 bears, and what they were finding was in this particular area, the bears that were habituated to eating at the dump site, the local dump, their hibernation period was shorter in the winter, and they also were looking at their chromosomes, the chromosome caps, those sort of things that protect the ends of your chromosomes, and they were wearing faster than the bears that were eating a natural diet. So that's pretty concerning. Again, it's a small study, so it's hard to say, but I am curious to know if that's found elsewhere, if that's more common than we think. But ultimately, yeah, we don't really know the impacts of them eating the processed foods that we throw away, or things like, think of, they'll even go for like gasoline or like chemicals, anything that smells, they'll try to eat it, which cannot be good for your body. If it says it's not good for you, then it's not good for a bear. So yeah, so we don't really know. And of course, habitat loss and fragmentation is always going to be a threat to any species. And so that's something we look at for bears as well. They need those big territories to be able to roam and find enough food for hibernation. Invasive species is another one. Beach bark disease. I'm not sure if people have been talking about that here in BPEG at all, but it is present on the peninsula, unfortunately. If you're out walking and you see beech trees that have like it almost looks like white powder on the trunk, it is a type of fungus and it does kill the tree. So it is likely that we'll lose beech trees. I don't know the timeline, but it does kill most trees that it infects. So that's a pretty huge loss for bears because the beech nuts are a big part of their diet, especially closer to fall when they're really trying to pack on that weight. And in summertime, to give you an idea of just how much they have to eat, summertime they're eating about 5,000 calories a day, which is a lot. Like the average human eats maybe 1,500, 2,000 calories a day. And in the fall, they're going more for 20,000 calories a day. So they're really ravenous in the fall, and beech nuts are really effective at getting them those calories quickly. To give you an idea, 20,000 calories would be, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head, 78 pounds of blueberries in a day, 672 acorns, or 7 pounds of black gold sunflower seeds, say if you have in your bird feeder, 7 pounds of bird feeding seeds. So it's a lot of food every day that they're looking for, and it kind of explains why we're seeing them so much in the fall especially, because they're just looking for the easiest caloric intake, whatever they can get that doesn't spend energy that they'll try to go for. Oak wilt as well has arrived in Canada. It's like in southern Ontario. It's not up here yet, but it is something of concern. It just showed up last year. So that would impact the oak trees and of course the acorns, which is another big fat and protein source for them. So climate change, of course, this is another one that we're not really sure the specific impacts yet until we kind of see them. So we can guess though. I mean, even this winter, I'm sure some of us have seen evidence of bears out in the middle of winter. Like they are waking up because it's getting warm. There's not a lot of snow cover, so it's going to be damp and colder sometimes. And interrupted hibernation is likely not good for them. They're spending energy that they don't really have to spare by getting up and moving, because there's nothing to eat really in the winter. So, and then of course like drought and the food availability or lack of food availability. Last year was really great for berries. Sometimes that's a red flag for me if we're seeing a huge bumper year for kind of across the board. To me, that kind of signals like the plants are stressed, and next year it's going to be not so great. So we'll see how it goes this summer. And then the less natural food there is, the more that we'll see them coming into human areas to get their food. So moving on from the depressing stuff, Parks Canada. So the park up here has been researching and working on bear conservation for quite some time. Like I mentioned before, the early 2000s, they were doing those studies with hibernation dens. But more recently or currently, we've been collaborating a lot with the Saugeen Nation and the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to do some of that work, some of the survey work, as well as doing hazing and getting some information from those bears as well. So that's what that picture is up on the top there. That is a bear that was showing up in the campground and getting too comfortable with humans. So we did something called a hard release. And so what that means is we live trap the bear, and then we'll put it under anesthetics, and then that's when they do this portion. So that's Nick from SON and Ben from the MNRF. They are working on the bear there. They'll take some DNA samples, they'll look at how old they are, they'll determine male or female, kind of their general health. They take a bunch of information. And then once the bear, we'll put them back in the trap. Once they wake up, that's when the hard release happens. It sounds really mean, but in the end, it's the kindest thing to do. We basically scare the daylights out of them and make sure that they associate that fear with people, because the bear at that point is becoming too comfortable with people. So basically you have a bunch of people yelling and hooting and hollering, and we'll also do like fireworks, bear bangers, or rubber bullets, depending on the severity of the bear's behavior, and then send them off into the woods in that big run, basically. It's very effective. We normally don't see a bear again once we've done a hard release, which makes sense. If I was a bear, I would not want to come back if that happened to me. Yeah, it's not something we want to do, but if it does get to the point, we know that we have that option, and it generally keeps them from coming back and getting more habituated. So that's one of the things that we do. The other one here is bear hair traps. So you'll see this gentleman here, he's putting a can of sardines on basically just a piece of lumber. And then what we do is 2 meters out from that tree, we'll put just one string of barbed wire, sort of at knee level. And the bear will smell the stinky sardines pretty quickly. And they'll come over and step over that barbed wire, and it catches the hair. And then we'll come back and collect the hair, and then from there we can get their DNA samples. And that gives us an idea of how many individuals there are in that area. So it kind of gives us an idea of density of the population. So it's not perfect, it's not a perfect model, especially because we have a pretty good idea on how many are in the park, but beyond that there's fewer test sites. Next year, we also don't do it every year, it happens sort of on a schedule. So next year is the next peninsula-wide study, so we're really looking forward to finding out how bears are doing peninsula-wide, because the last time that we did one, so in 2018, from 2019 to 2018, they were in a pretty steep decline. They were not doing well. And then in 2018, it looks like the trend sort of broke away from that decline. I wouldn't say stabilized per se, it's a little too early to say that, but it looked encouraging, I would say. It looked optimistic. So it'll be really exciting to see next year how they're doing peninsula-wide. The other part of a lot of what I do, especially at the park for bears, is prevention and response side of things in the campground. So obviously, I mean, camping can be a big attractant, especially when you have a density like a campground rather than just one campsite, where people are coming in, you know, every night or every other night. There's new people coming in. And so we've done a lot of work in the last few years to try and prevent bears from coming at all. So what that looked like for us was having patrols out in the campground, essentially, to be chatting with people and making sure everyone knew about the Bear Aware program. So keeping their food stored really well, and nothing out for the bears to smell and come looking for. We also did a lot of education, like meeting people at the campground office as they're checking in and having chats about what they can do. There's a photo of one of the bears that we did a hard release for in the bear trap there as well. So that would be on the response side of things. So if the bear did come, we do those hard release I was talking about. We did some infrastructure stuff. So there's me after washing all the dumpsters and putting giant stickers on them that say, please close the lid properly. So yeah, and we also changed the way we do things at the dumpster. So only 2 dumpsters are open at a time. We keep the other ones locked. Wait till it gets full, and then we'll switch, because we found it less frequent that a lid would be left open if fewer of them were available. So yeah, doing some tweaking and trial and error and seeing what works, but we have seen a huge decrease in bears coming into the campground, which is really, really great news. And here we go to what you can do, how to be a good neighbor. I'm proud of that one. So the first step you're already doing. You're here learning about bears, hopefully in a minute asking questions about bears. That's always the first step, I think, to be able to understand and sort of connect with the animal and sort of have a reason to care and do some action for them. Of course, if you're camping or hiking, practicing leave no trace or bear campsite methods. So basically anything that smells, you want it in a bear-proof something. So usually that means a car if you're camping. So anything that smells includes not just your food or your garbage. I'm talking about your dishes, even if they're clean, because camping clean is not really clean. We all know that. Bug spray, sunscreen, deodorant, toothpaste, anything that has a smell is all going to go in your car, windows up, doors locked. Because otherwise the bear, remember, they can smell 2 kilometers away, 30 centimeters into the ground, they're going to be able to smell your stuff. So definitely not in your tent or your trailer, but in a locked vehicle. And some campers, unfortunately, have learned the hard way that you do need to keep those windows shut, because if you leave them cracked, they just pop the window off. So yeah, you want to keep it nice and sealed in there. And that's any time that basically you're not using it. Sounds extreme, but if you're going to the bathroom for 5 minutes, or you want to go for a hike, throw it in the car, play it safe. Definitely overnight, you want to put it in your car. Practicing good bear encounter etiquette, your whoa bear method. So this is even in your own backyard, or if you see a bear kind of wandering around on the road somewhere, or if you're hiking, Basically, if you see a bear anytime, unfortunately, you have to be mean. You have to yell at the bear, or honk your horn, clap, whatever you have to do to make them feel unwelcome, unfortunately, because that's the best way to prevent them from getting habituated. If people sort of stand or sit quietly and they're taking pictures and they're whispering and they're allowing the bear to be close, or in a community or something like that, that bear is going to feel comfortable and safe, right? So we want to make sure they get the message loud and clear that they should not be in town or they should not be in your backyard or whatever. Excuse me. At home, there's lots of things that you can do. Bird feeders are a pretty easy one. I would say only in winter I would put bird feeders up when the bears are hibernating. Otherwise, they will likely destroy it in the summer. So, yeah, I wouldn't have one up in the summertime. Garbage, again, or any kind of attractants, make sure they're secured. This is a pretty obvious one. But that, maybe the less obvious parts of that are even like paint, gas canisters, like oil or anything like that, anything that's smelly. You want to make sure that's stored in a shed that is pretty secure, like they're not going to be able to yank the door open or something, because they will investigate. They'll try and get into whatever's smelly. We have seen bears in the campground go for. I have an empty jug of like lantern oil that smelled like citronella that has teeth marks in it that a bear tried to eat. It's got a giant poison symbol on it, so obviously they can't read that, but so yeah, anything smelly they're gonna go for. Your barbecue is a really, really important one. That smells delicious to them. The drippings are so hard to stay away from. So keeping it as clean as you can, even after every use, is ideal. Because they may stop by and check it out, and they even knock it over. So probably best to keep it clean so they don't do that. If you have like an outdoor eating area, always best to wipe it down after you're done. They can smell the tiniest trace of food. If you're composting, just looking up resources to figure out the best responsible way to do that in bear country. There are some really great resources out there. I believe BearWise, through the Ontario government, has some resources on composting tips. I would say, yeah, if you're going to do that, look up those resources, or maybe just avoid normal composting in general if you are having frequent bear visitors. And then if you are getting those frequent visitors for whatever reason, you can leave a radio, sort of if you have a shed or something, you can leave a radio on just to try and deter them when they come back for those 3 or 4 checks that I was talking about. So they hear voices and stuff, and it might deter them a little bit better. The other thing that you can do for bears is volunteering or supporting or getting involved with any kind of local conservation efforts, any organization like BPEG that is working to either educate or protect habitat or anything like that, because that is ultimately going to benefit bears. So, all right. And that is the end of what I have for you, but of course I would love to take some questions. Yeah?
So when you're talking about a hard release, are they released into the same area or are they moved?
That's a really great question, actually. So in general, it's best not to move bears. That is something we hear a lot, or people ask, well, why don't you just move them to Northern Ontario or something? Often that is unfortunately a death sentence for the bear. Bears are very territorial, and so if they were just dropped into another territory, they may be killed by another bear, or like there may not be the right food sources for them there or whatever. So generally we don't move them, but we do release them, yeah, in the same spots. The other benefit to releasing them in the same spots is that, like I mentioned, you want them to associate people with, whoa, scary. So you also want them to associate the place, right? So for example, in the campground, we might release them sort of in our assets, the maintenance compound, because it's very, there's a gravel parking lot and buildings and people around, and so at least then it's close to where they were in the campground, and they're getting that message pretty loud and clear. So, yeah.
We have heard once that the DNA of the bears up on the peninsula are unique
Yeah.
to them. Is that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's true. So they're almost considered like a subspecies,
Yeah.
the bears here. They are smaller than bears elsewhere in Ontario as well. And if you think about it, we're sort of on an island. So obviously we have water on 3 sides, but then down to the south of the peninsula, it very quickly changes to sort of agricultural land. And there's not a lot of places for them to go beyond that. So definitely, especially teenage male bears will move, they'll just push through that and keep going until they find their own territory. But generally, we don't see a lot of movement of bears beyond that line. And so what that's done over time is, yeah, they've been stuck here essentially. So they've sort of made their own pool of genetics. But yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
Is there still a spring bear hunt, Maddie?
Hunting, I'm not as familiar with, I'll be totally honest. I would say the best place for getting answers about hunting would be the MNRF. Because they're the ones who regulate it, and I'm not a hunter myself, so I don't know.
I understood that there was still a spring bear hunt.
Right.
And I also heard at one point that there were only about 50 bears left on the peninsula, but I don't know if that number has increased. And there was one thought that they would be gone by 2050. I remember
Right.
Sean told me that by 2050 the bear population would be gone.
Yeah.
And
like
so then they still have the spring bear hunt.
Yeah, again, I don't know about hunting in particular, but for population, we do know it's definitely more than 50. The data was looking like, again, there's a pretty big margin for error because we're looking at density, and so we're just applying that to other areas in the peninsula. But it's less than 500, and I would say like probably more like between 300 and 500. So there's quite a few when you think about it, like. Where do they all fit? But they do. They're definitely around. But again, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like next year when we do the peninsula-wide study again. Yeah, and then if you do want answers about hunting or anything like MNR related, I can give you some contact information after if you'd like.
Right.
Yeah.
Perhaps if it turns out there still is a spring bear hunt, you might want to put it up as a threat.
Yeah.
Are you looking for volunteers to buy property where you put the barbed wire and?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe, yeah. I can after if you want to exchange information, and then I can take it if you are interested. I can get you connected with the right person. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
What's the gestation period? So once the embryo does implant, how long before they?
Oh, that's a good question. I know they're born in January, generally, the cubs. So gestation would likely only be a couple months max. Because they're one of those animals, kind of like pandas, they're just so tiny when they're born. And it's almost like the den is sort of like an external womb when you think about it. Like they would not survive outside the den. And that's just how they've evolved. To survive, it's less stressful on the mom's body, I think, that way, because she's asleep anyway, so,
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I figured it must be short, but.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, I'm not
pretty
sure
amazing.
exactly how long, but I would think at like 2 months or something like that, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
You said that they often change from, or they usually have new dens each year, and is there a shortage of dens? And if there were a shortage, has anybody tried to make artificial dens?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't think there'd be a shortage of dens on the peninsula, only because the topography here has got the karst. There's lots of holes and nooks and crannies everywhere. So I don't think it would be too much of an issue for them to find a new spot every year. But elsewhere, that's a good question for elsewhere, if that's ever been the case. I think they will do a little bit of like decorating, landscaping, whatever you want to call it. They'll dig around and make it comfy as well. So if there's enough soil and stuff for them to manipulate, I think they can make most things work. But yeah, it's a great question.
So with it being so warm this winter, and it's still winter now,
Yeah.
do we have evidence that the bears have woken up and been out and about? And
I
that
personally have
sort of thing?
seen poop on the road. I've seen some people post pictures of tracks, like bear tracks in the mud. Yeah, so I think they are awake. I haven't seen a bear myself, like awake, but there definitely seems to be evidence. Yeah, and whether they're just sort of getting up and stretching their legs, or if they're actually getting up and looking for food because they think it's spring, I don't know.
And will they go back to bed when it gets cold?
Yes,
Like, I mean,
they do.
how does it work?
Yeah, they do, and even when it is a normal winter and it's cold the whole way through, they'll still get up from time to time, and they may even exit the den just to kind of, again, get up and stretch. But yeah, it's hard to say this winter, like, what does that look like? How long are they awake? I don't know. It's one of those things that's going to be kind of the new reality for them. So yeah.
I think most of the time when we see bears, it's a single bear, unless you happen to see a mother with some cubs. So I'm just wondering, at the time of mating, if there's a particular time of year, do two bears sort of hang out together for a while, or does a male just come along and...
As far as I know, they do hang out for a little while, but not very long. They're not like... they're not like married couple, or like for some of the animals that are mated for life that actually spend time together. It's generally pretty short exchange, but it could be a day or a few days, I think. But then they'll move on. So and I mean for the males, they're going to be wanting to find as many females as they can, so they don't want to spend too much time with one of them. Oh, great question. Average litter size, usually 1 to 2 cubs. Every once in a while you'll see 3. But I mean, that's a lot of mouths to feed. So usually 2 is the norm. Yeah. And then generally those cubs will stay with mom for 2 years. So she'll kind of have cubs every 2 years to space them out a little bit. And then she'll have to kick them out for her next babies. So some of them are a little bit more stubborn. It takes some convincing from mom. She'll like actually chase them sometimes. You're like, get out of here. But yeah, generally they're spending 2 years together. So yeah, until they're big enough. Yeah.
What's their lifespan?
Lifespan, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I believe the oldest in the wild is usually around 30 years old. Females aren't going to start having babies till they're 5. And males generally are not going to be successful to mate until they're 9 years old. What I mean by that is they have to fight other males, and so generally they're not strong or experienced enough until they're about 9 years old to be able to win against other males. So, but yeah, the older bears are usually around 30 years old. Yeah.
Besides us, are there predators for bears?
Not to my knowledge, no, not really. Except other bears. I think it's not totally unheard of for male bears to attack cubs if they think that they're not theirs. It's a way for them to make sure their genes are more successful. So it's an unfortunate reality, I guess. Unfortunate from our perspective, but it is, it is nature. So I think other bears are the biggest threat, and then people, of course. But other than that, there's not a whole lot that would go after a bear. So yeah.
With this increased collaboration with MNRF, and I guess an increased emphasis by parks on conservation and research, is there tracking of road mortality? Do we know annually how many are being killed, or?
I think, I believe the OMNRF does keep track of those things. I know, I was speaking to Ben, who's kind of their bear guy, and he was saying that he does, he gets a pretty good idea of individual bears, like who's doing what and where, because people are calling him, and he sort of keeps profiles of all of them to keep track. And so he usually knows, he's one of the first to know if a bear is hit, say on the road. And so I would assume that he's keeping track of that. I don't believe the park keeps track of that.
Because that would be an interesting addition to the presentation, to have a table on road mortality over the last X number of years,
Yeah,
because
sure.
it does give an indication of the severity of the problem,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
something that people can
Yeah.
watch out for. And is it where the, I don't know if the information's available, when is it likely to occur? Is it
Right,
most
if there's a
often
time of
in
year or
fall,
something,
is it
yeah.
fall or time of day,
Yeah.
is it at dusk, or?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I don't think the park keeps track of that, just because we have such a small area compared to the rest of the peninsula. But Ben would definitely know, so I'll chat with him next time I see him. And yeah, thank you.
So our daughter actually was driving south of Elliott Lake, and a bear ran out and hit the car, did a lot of damage to the car. The bear ran off into the woods, so we've got no way of knowing,
Right.
keeping our fingers crossed that the bear was okay, but it could have gone into the woods and then,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, those ones are hard too,
Yeah.
because you don't know how they ended up. Could be fine or they could be not. It's hard to say, but yeah.
How big is a 1-year-old bear and how big is a 2-year-old bear?
So they're fully grown. Female will be between 150 to 250 pounds, and they generally reach their adult size by the end of that 2 years. And then the males they can be up to 600 pounds. Not on the peninsula as much. It's pretty rare to see a massive bear like that on the peninsula, but definitely around 400-pound mark. Be pretty easy to see something like that. So. But yeah, generally by the end of that 2 years, they're ready to go. That's kind of why the mom's kicking them out, because they're big enough they can handle themselves. So yeah.
So a 1-year-old bear would be about a large dog, like a large dog.
Probably a bit bigger. They grow pretty quickly, but they're definitely by the end of that first year, they're still obviously not fully grown, like compared to the mom. But yeah, they're a good size still. Yeah.
Some wildlife researchers track bears or animals with collars. Are there any bears on the peninsula that are being tracked?
So there used to be in that early 2000s study I was talking about, they were putting collars on them, partly so they could find them in the den again or see where they were going. But I believe they were putting collars on them at that time, but we don't right now. We do tag them, so if we do a hard release, for example, we will give them an ear tag. So if you see a bear that has a brightly colored earring, that means that it's been caught before. And generally, the rule of thumb for that is the first time they get caught, they get one tag. The second time they get caught, sort of second infraction, if you want to call it, they'll get another tag. And then if you catch a bear with 2 tags, it's kind of 3 strikes you're out. And unfortunately, at that point, the bear does have to be dispatched, which means they get put down. So that's why we try so hard to avoid that, right? Because we absolutely don't want to do that. But yeah, that's how we kind of keep track. Yeah.
I saw camping at Maze Provincial Park about maybe 9 years ago, and there are a lot of bears in that park. And the one that was greeting everyone as they were arriving had the 2 tags.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
How often would they have 3 strikes? Like, is that
Not very often, at least in my experience. We have not had to dispatch a bear since I've been working, in the 5 years I've been working. I know the M&R has before, and I'm sure the park has before I started working there. It must be at some point, I don't know, but it doesn't happen too often, thankfully, because that hazing and the hard release is quite effective. It's just that every once in a while just is not enough for a bear. So yeah, thankfully it's on the rare side, which is good. Yeah.
So you just deal with the bears that are in the parks, and the ministry deals with the bears that are everywhere else?
That's correct. Yeah. So the M&R will come and help us in the park, especially if we're doing hard release. They'll come in, but they'll also help us. Like we ask them for advice a lot on next steps or what we should be doing or certain signage and stuff like that. We do ask them a lot.
Because I know that they don't trap them anymore. The ministry doesn't. They don't relocate them anymore.
They don't relocate, but they will trap and do hard releases still.
They don't even work after dark.
Oh,
The
yeah.
ministry doesn't.
Yeah.
Their bear line doesn't even work until April 1st.
Yes,
So
the
if
bear
you have an
wise.
encounter,
Mm-hmm.
your SOL, we did GOPP,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a problem,
Yeah.
which is kind of sad.
Yeah. So it's April 1st to November 30th usually, and yeah.
When you're dealing with weather like this and they're out and about earlier, maybe that should change.
Yeah.
their
Well, I mean,
focus.
I was listening to CBC just a few days ago, and they're talking about moving up the forest firefighter start times because that's the reality, right? So it's potentially a conversation we need to have with other things like bears or the seasons are changing, and so it's a good point. Yeah.
Just the other day I read, out in BC, they euthanized 603 bears because they're becoming nuisances. Does the park people and even yourself track trends across Canada? Because that is a terrible number.
Yeah.
And what is happening with the bears?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything like that in terms of like a countrywide or Parks Canada-wide tracking. It might exist and I just don't know about it, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's very sad. And that's why we do all this work, right? We want to, that's the ultimate thing we want to avoid. We want them to thrive and not end up being put down, of course. So, and I don't know for BC if they have grizzly bears as well, which kind of complicates things a little bit. I'm sure, but that's really sad.
So if I've been a terrible cottage owner and I've left my garbage out the night before and the barbecue is dirty and I feed the dog outside and the bear keeps coming, is there something that I can still do when that bear has come once or twice and he's like, wow, this woman is really stupid, I love it. Is there something that I can still do to turn that behavior around?
Yeah, definitely. So the number one thing will obviously be addressing the attractants and getting rid of those. So, having your clean barbecue and your garbage secured and all that stuff. But you can do more than that. You can do, like I mentioned, the radio. That is something that the M&R recommends actually quite often. Having a radio playing kind of 24/7.
Is there a particular music they dislike?
I don't know. Do an experiment, maybe.
Okay, yeah, opera. Okay, opera.
Go back.
And you can, if you say you see the bear coming around, even when you've done all that stuff, it's really handy just to be able to hit your car alarm on your key fob.
Garden hose works well too.
Because then, sorry?
Garden hose works well too.
Oh, yeah. But then you don't have to go
He's
outside.
really close then, though.
Yeah, so then it's kind of like a remote way of doing something really loud.
Okay.
And right away, so that they're like, yeah.
Well, only because there have been incidents on Mallory Beach Road. So I was looking for some things that I could share with people that, okay, if you happen to be on the path the bear usually takes and he's getting close, try the radio with opera. Try, or whatever.
Metallica or something.
Yeah, something. But the car alarm is a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful.
It can be pretty effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice too because it's safe for you
Right,
as well.
you're inside.
Yeah. And same thing if you're like camping or something, and you hear a bear in your campsite, say, that's an easy thing to do without getting out of your tent. Might wake everybody up, but at least it's not bear noise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, I got an email about their lines that the lines, them and our lines are open March 1st this year.
March 1st, okay.
So I'm 90% sure that's accurate.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll look into that. Awesome. Yeah.
I'm curious about what's the distinguishing feature of the scent of a bear. Like I can pick out a fox that's
Yeah.
maybe traveled.
Yeah.
What's that distinguishing feature of a bear?
Rank.
Yeah.
Musty.
I would say musty. There's a musk to it, almost a bit like wet dog, with like dirt or something in there. It's pretty strong, and it's unlike anything else, I would say. Like there's no skunkiness to it like a fox or anything like that. But I would say it's pretty strong, like wet dog, like dirty wet dog sort of thing.
Maddie, these people have a very worrisome story. Why don't you share your story?
Good.
Oh, well, basically, they said they were trapped inside the house.
For a long time,
Mm.
45 minutes,
Yep, it kept coming back and
Pace.
forth and back and forth.
looking in the windows.
Yeah.
She's
Even
bringing
thought I
pots and
was
pans like she's
possessed,
crazy.
banging on a pot,
And we
jumping up
couldn't
and
get
down.
help from
Yeah,
that line.
Right on the other side of the door.
that's scary for
Wasn't
sure.
going anywhere.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, if a bear is trying to break in, that's a 911 call, absolutely.
Well, we had to because
Yeah.
it just kept coming. And
Yeah.
then the police came and chased it off.
Yeah.
And then it came back.
Yeah.
And they chased it off and it came back like this, it was not.
There was no food outside.
No,
It,
nothing.
it was actually March the 17th. I'm trying to call on the bear line
Right.
and listening to all this nonsense.
And I'm on 911.
She's on in the
Yeah.
bathroom calling the OPP.
Because we have dogs and we think the dogs barking and stuff, maybe.
Well, in
They don't want
mid-March,
to come.
there's not gonna be a lot of food, so they're probably pretty desperate at
It
that point.
didn't, it had spent a week in the area at
Between
the
the two
neighbor's
avenues.
house on 13, laying on the other side of the fence in the daytime, and her dog was nose to nose with it.
Mm.
Then it spent time before it came down to our end, at the very end of the road, and had them terrorized because it was going from their front door to the back. Their grandchildren were just
Yeah.
beside themselves. They were
Yeah.
small.
And it wouldn't go, it just
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Yeah, so a bear like lingering like that or trying to get into a house with people in it or anything like that is
My
pretty
dogs
automatic.
never even barked
911, so
when that bear was outside.
yeah.
When they were in the house, they never made a sound.
Yeah. You're smart.
She did.
Yeah, it was only me.
Doesn't sound like Oakland.
Yeah. Yeah, that's scary.
It took them hours and hours to get it away.
Yeah. Yeah, and we may see more stuff like that now with change of seasons, right?
Well, we have a bear already on the 12th Avenue. And you can see the claw marks on the road and
Yeah.
And there's no food.
No. Definitely
None.
not yet. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll show you a video of one that was at my neighbor's last year.
Yeah.
During the summer, when bears are awake, are they usually sleeping at night or are they still just as active at night?
It depends on what they're feeding on. Habituated bears will be out at night usually, because there's less people out and about if they're in people-y areas. But normally I think they're more diurnal, like daytime animals. But just like raccoons, I mean, they're kind of just whenever they're hungry and there's food, they'll be awake. Especially in summer when it's so important to be eating all the time. Like some days they'll be awake for many more hours than they sleep. like potentially 18, 20 hours of the day they'll be awake and eating. So yeah, it depends on the time of year and what's available and yeah, what they can get their hands on. So yeah.
You talked about when they wake up in the spring. You talked about not having bird feeders out in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
When should the bird feeders come out in the fall? How do you know that they've hibernated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say as long as it's kind of steadily below freezing and maybe there's a bit of snow, it's a pretty good guess. As long as there's nothing growing, essentially, they're probably going to head into hibernation. So if there's a little bit of snow cover and it's too cold, like things will just wilt, that's generally a good sign.
So staying below freezing with daytime and nighttime?
Sorry?
Staying below freezing day and night?
Yeah, I would say it's not like a hard line or anything, but yeah, I think those two things combined are usually a good sign. Yeah, and that's kind of when it's nice to be helping out birds too, because there's a little bit less for them, so it works out nicely. Yeah. Yeah.
One question in terms of offspring in their territory. I know you mentioned male offspring will move south. In terms of females, do they assume their mom's territory, or would they then set out to find new territory?
That's a really great question, and I don't think I have the answer right now. My impression or my gut instinct is that females generally stay in the same area because they're not. Males will fight each other, but females not so much. They're not too concerned with that. So, but that's something I'll have to look up. That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer, but
no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Based on the territory that each bear requires, like the area, I'm curious, and perhaps you don't have an answer, but what would the maximum population of bears on the peninsula be?
Ooh, that's another question I don't really have an answer to. It's under 500 now, and we know that they've been in decline for some time. So more than that would be a safe answer. Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, I think more than we think would fit, and more than 500 would be my guess. But yeah. Another great question. You guys are starting to stump me. I will say too, if we are wanting to wrap up, definitely I can stick around for a bit afterwards with more questions, or if further questions I don't have answers to, we can exchange emails or whatever, and we can get answers for you. So yeah.
So thank you so much, Evelyn. It was fantastic. She'll be around for a short time. If you want to ask her some more questions, that'd be great. We do have some tea and water and cookies. Help yourself. And just a reminder, our next meeting is April 3rd, right back here. And save the date for Earth Day.